Hello my fellow chatterers and book lovers, and anyone else who has popped in because you were curious about what this is or you have got a bit lost. I am Chatty. This is my channel, Chatty the Mad Chatter, where I'm going to be chatting away madly because it's that time of month, sort of. I've got a bit of a backlog going on, but I'm going to be chatting away about the stats for all the books. That's the way they go. All the books I read in the month of June. It is a long video, so it is a one shot. There is no editing. Clink, 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 clink. And for those who are interested, we're on take 3 because I keep fudging up my words too much to make sense. So fingers crossed we keep rolling this time. The books that I read this month, I had some that were like set in stone, ones that I definitely wanted to read, and then I had a whole pool of options that I gave myself. These were Mrs. Moore Goes Missing, The Leper of St. Giles, The People's History of Heaven, The Secret of the Stars, and Hamlet Prince of Denmark Street, a graphic novel, Solitaire and Typhoon. And out of those two, the ones that made it into my reading month was Solitaire and Typhoon. The books that I didn't get to, that was from my June TBR. If you wanted to see it, it is here. I will put the link in there for you. I had set in stone Dawnsharde, which is continuing my Brandon Sanderson Stormlight Archive journey. Emma, because I was just so keen to read it. I was doing a buddy read of Pages and Co. with Kelli from Kelli Reads a Lot, Tallia from Bandana Book Mum, and Stacy. What were the other ones? I wanted to continue with some more series, so the ones you voted for was the David Bad trilogy, so I started that with The City of Brass. If you're interested in what that video was, I put a load of series out that I wanted to start and complete this year and got you to vote on which ones you would like to see me reading. I will link the video here for that one. So I did manage to continue with those series. I was hoping to also read non-fiction. I've got some that I was interested in. One from the banned book challenge and one that I needed to kind of finish for my magical readathon TBR, basically before we go to the next stage of it. So that was Gender Games by Juno Dawson and Beyond Magenta, a Trans Teen Speak Out. I didn't manage to finish either one of those. They are still work in progress, so they didn't get finished in June. And I did have some other books that I need to add into here. So that is Kòkú and the Heart of Midnight, which is one of the books I was finishing off in May. Sorry, I had a bit of a brain freeze there. And another book I just randomly picked up and put in the mix is The Boy Who Fell from the Sky. If you want to know any of my thoughts on these books, I do have my June wrap-up, which I shall put here. So that is where I talk about my feelings for the books. This is just about the stats. So I'm just breaking down the month and exploring what I read. So quite a lot from my June TBR. The other books that I didn't read was Threads That Bind, which was a fairy loot book I was hoping to buddy read with Vidania and Chloe, but that didn't happen. Just for various different reasons. So I didn't read that one either. But the books I read in June is 9 books. So that is Brandon Sanderson's Dawnsharde, The Boy Who Fell from the Sky by Benjamin Dean, Kwazia Shiraz's Typhoon. The second book is The Pages and Co., which is Tilly and the Book of Fairy Tales by Anna James. Kòkú Àkànbí and the Heart of Midnight, which is by Maria Monteiro Adebisi. Solitaire by Alice Oseman. Oh, I never mentioned this one. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, the final one in that trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. Emma by Jane Austen, and The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. So going straight in with the stats, now I have introduced all of the books to you. Looking at the age range, I read 3 middle grades. That is so the 3 middle grades are Tilly and the Book of Fairy Tales, Kòkú Àkànbí and the Heart of Midnight, and The Boy Who Fell from the Sky. So that is 3 books out of 9. So I am hitting my goal for reading a third middle grade each month. I then had 1 YA, which was Solitaire by Alice Oseman, and 5 adult books: City of Brass, Emma, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, Typhoon, and Dawnsharde. Looking at the size of the books that I've been reading this month, I have 2 books that are mouse sized. So I link all my books to animals. Mouse is anything that is 150 to 301 through to 151 to 300 pages. So that's Dawnsharde and The Boy Who Fell Beneath the Sky. A goat is anything that is 301 to 400 pages, and that is 5 books. 5 books. Typhoon, Tallia and the Lost Fairy Tales, Kòkú Àkànbí and the Heart of Midnight, Solitaire, and The Return of the King from Lord of the Rings. Now, The Return of the King is technically over 500 pages, but I didn't read the appendices. And the bit I read was 300 and something pages, and then I didn't read the appendices. So I'm only counting it as a goat, not what would have been an elephant. Then I read 1 cow-sized book, which is Emma by Jane Austen. A cow is 401 to 500 pages. And then I read 1 elephant-sized book, which was A City of Brass. So that is a book that is 501 to 700 pages. So in terms of the format of the books I read, I had 1 book that was a novella, which was Dawnsharde by Brandon Sanderson. And I had one book that was audio, which was Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, and the rest were all physical novels. No graphic novels this month, and I don't read ebooks because I don't have an e-reader. I then going to look at which books belong to me and which books come from other places. So 7 of these 9 books are mine. That's The City of Brass, Emma, Solitaire, Kòkú Àkànbí, Tallia and the Lost Fairy Tales, Typhoon, and Dawnsharde. And 2 books were from the library. Now, I do have the physical copy of Lord of the Rings here. So the physical copy is mine and my husband's book. But the audio book I did get, I did borrow from Audible. So that's 1 book from the library, which was The Boy Who Fell from the Sky, and 1 book borrowed from Audible. And then 7. Which are mine. 2 of these books were reread. That's Return of the King and Emma. The rest were all new reads for me. Looking at the genres, we have got 5 fantasy books. So that is City of Brass, Return of the King, Kòkú Àkànbí, Tallia and the Lost Fairy Tales, and Dawnsharde. 1 book is historical fiction. That is Typhoon. 1 book is a sci-fi, that's The Boy Who Fell from the Sky. 1 book is a contemporary, that's Solitaire. And 1 book is a classic, and that is Emma. Technically, Lord of the Rings could be put in the category of classic as well, but for me it fits fantasy more. Ta-da! Okay, moving on to series. So for series, I have started 2 series. 1 I had accounted for already, which is The City of Brass, but I have now started the Juju Land series. So this is book 1 of Juju Land, which is Kòkú Àkànbí. Now, if I had done my June wrap up, my June stats on time, Kòkú would have classed as up to date. But the 2nd book is now out, so I can't class it as up to date. It's 2 started now. And I have made progress with 2 series. So that is Dawnsharde by Brandon Sanderson, book 3.5 in Stormlight, and Tallia and the Lost Fairy Tales, which is book 2 in Pages & Co. And I have finished, I've just destroyed my pile of books now. I have finished my reread or new listen to The Lord of the Rings, because I really wanted to listen to the Andy Serkis audiobooks. So I have now finished that one. So yay, one finished. So another goal I have is trying to have half of what I read being from global majority authors. Unfortunately, I am not doing very well at that. I only have 3 out of 9, so it's a third, but a third is not half, so I am not achieving that goal. I do want to look at why this is and kind of take a deeper look into what books I possess and what are kind of the barriers, because I'm hitting it not then more, which is a terrible way of saying it. I'm not achieving that goal. I think I've maybe achieved it once this year so far, so that's not great. Anyway, the books that are global majority are Typhoon, and The Boy Who Fell from the Sky, and Kòkú Àkànbí. By global majority, I mean a book that is written by a Black, Indigenous or person of colour author. I'm not really picking up Latinx books or books by Indigenous authors. Again, I think it's just because I just don't have as much access to them, in terms of I get a lot of my books through libraries or ones that I buy, and I try not to buy books, so it's books that I already have on my shelves, or ones I get in book boxes. So again, it's something that I would like to explore a bit more. Okay, thinking now about the diversity that's represented in my books. So I've already spoken about global majority. So also having books set in different places. I've got 2 books set in Africa. So we've got The City of Brass and Kòkú Àkànbí that are both set in different places in Africa. 1 book set in Asia, which is Typhoon. Again, like I said, no books with Latinx or Indigenous representation. I've got 1 book with LGBTQ plus representation in here, which is Solitare by Alice Oseman. There are other books that do have some LGBTQ plus characters, but they are minor characters. They're not a main character, so therefore it doesn't count. I only count it, I'm quite strict that I only count it if the protagonist is part of that community. Technically, you don't know in this book, but I do know that from the Heartstopper series, that our protagonist is Ace. Disability representation. There's 2 books with physical disability representation. That is Dawnsharde. We have a main character in that. And Kòkú Àkànbí, we have a main character in this book, both with physical disability represented. No books with neurodiverse representation in them this month, but I do have a few books that have got mental health representation in here. So I have, gonna remember which ones those were. So I have 3 books with mental health representation in here. Typhoon has got some sort of grief and trauma representation in here. I don't think it's the best representation, but I think it's decent enough, especially kind of like this book was written sort of like a good 20 years ago. I think we've kind of moved on a little bit to how it was sort of represented in here, but it's still definitely touched on those, and it's like made people more aware of it. Lord of the Rings, there is definitely like healing, sort of like mental health, kind of like grief, feelings of hurt, and like trying to find like your light again is definitely explored in this one. And Solitaire has a huge kind of exploration about mental health, like particularly depression in this book. So yeah, if those are triggers for any of you, please do check the trigger warnings. I have all the books linked in the story graph in the description box, so you can find out more about them. So a mixed bag in terms of the diversity in these books. So now we are left just with what was my least favourite book from June and what was my favourite book from June. So I'm going for the least first because I always like to start off with that one. My least favourite book was Typhoon. It's not something I normally read. There's a reason I don't normally read it. I was compelled by certain aspects in this story, but I didn't really have a great connection with any of the characters, nor did I kind of like fall in love with sort of like the plot and the story. I did really enjoy kind of like immersing myself in this village life and kind of enjoying the sort of more of the minor characters and their lives. I think I would have just liked to have just hung out with them rather than the ones that became like the focus of the story. But yeah, this was my least favourite. I was really kind of like hard put to choose a favourite because I just had an enjoyable month with reading all my books. I had a delightful time. I don't include rereads in my least favourite and my favourite because it's a different reading experience when you do a reread. I think you've got a deeper connection with that book and I don't think it's fair. So Lord of the Rings and Emma were both out of this equation. But the last book I read was City of Brass. That book just blew me away. City of Brass was my favourite book this month. Adult fantasy, politics, magic, great characters. I had a brilliant time. Really enjoy S.A. Chakraborty's storytelling. Cannot wait to continue with this series. And that is all my stats. Do let me know if you've got any fun stats you would like to share about any of your reading, whether you do it seasonally, whether you kind of keep looking at it as a year so far, whether you break it down monthly, however you do it. If you don't do stats, do you have an interest in doing stats at all? Is there any kind of part of your reading you like to log or check? Have a chat in the comments because you know I love a chat. Happy reading, everyone.